It was supposed to be an indomitable showcase of Russia's power. An unstoppable, nuclear-capable missile would take to the skies in a test that would tell the world, and especially Ukraine, that Russia has the ability to hit any country, anywhere, with its nukes. Instead, Russia's unstoppable nuclear missile exploded in Putin's face, leaving the Russian leader humiliated once again. A weapon of mass destruction, more like a weapon of mass embarrassment that has become the latest indictment on Russia's inability to ensure that its most dangerous weapons work the way they're supposed to work. The missile in question was an RS-28 Sarmat, which is also known as the Satan II, in what seems like a name created to denote the missile's destructive power. On paper at least, the Satan II lives up to its billing. Sometimes referred to as a doomsday weapon, the Sarmat is supposed to be able to hit almost any target on the planet, including practically any region of the United States. Missile Defense Advocacy provides the missile's basic specifications, noting that it weighs over 200 tons and that it's planned to be a hypersonic missile. That means it will be able to travel over 5 times faster than the speed of sound, which is supposed to make it practically impossible for even the most modern air defense systems to shoot out of the sky. There's a lot more. The Sarmat can carry multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, or MIRV, nuclear warheads. A MIRV is actually multiple nukes loaded into a single missile, each of which can be aimed at a different target to allow a spread of strikes conducted via a single missile launch. Russia claims the missile can hold up to 10 heavy MIRVs or 16 light MIRVs, which makes it a devastating prospect to face for any country that is unfortunate enough to incur Russia's wrath. The Center for Joint Warfare Studies adds that the Sarmat is supposed to have a range of between 10,000 and 18,000 kilometers, or around 6,200 to 11,180 miles, and that it's part of a group of 6 weapons of mass destruction that began development during Putin's reign. The Tsirkon, Kinzhal, Avangard, and Poseidon are among the 6, though the Sarmat is intended to be the jewel in the crown thanks to its immense speed and power. All of this makes the Sarmat sound like a devastating weapon, but Russia has a problem. It can't seem to get the Sarmat off the ground. On November 28, United 24 media reported that Russia had carried out a missile launch from its Yasny test site, which is located in the Orenburg region of Russia. That test, which seems likely to have been of a Sarmat missile, didn't go to plan. Very soon after takeoff, the missile failed and arced back toward the ground, exploding in a cloud of purple smoke close to a nearby town. Normally, Russia would pretend like these sorts of failed missile tests never happened. With the Sarmat intended to be such an intimidating weapon, having any news of a failed test launch would show the world that Russia's bark is far larger than its bite. However, Russia can't deny that it just experienced a failed test. There's footage, and it shows us exactly how the Sarmat failed. Already being spread all over social media, the minute-long footage initially shows the Sarmat missile rising into the sky on a straight trajectory just as intended. However, it doesn't take long for the missile to spin out of control. Within seconds, the missile spins around and collapses back toward the ground. A massive cloud of smoke rises into the sky, and Russia has a failed Sarmat launch on its hands. United 24 media adds that other residents have reported hearing a loud explosion and visible smoke rising into the air. Russia, of course, remains tight-lipped. Regional authorities have said that there will be no evacuation following the failed launch, United 24 media reports. Plus, they refuse to mention what type of missile was being tested, but it was almost certainly a Sarmat. And information shared by Militani seems to confirm it. In a November 29th report, the outlet says that some initially believed the failed launch to be of a UR-100N missile equipped with a hypersonic Avangard warhead, which is one of the 6 weapons of mass destruction we just mentioned. If this were the case, Putin will have just watched one of his supposedly world-beating nuclear weapons blowing up in his face. However, that initial belief was dispelled by an analyst named Etienne Marcuse, who works for the French strategic and defense think tank FRS. Marcuse took to X to explain what he believed had happened and why he was fairly certain that the failing Russian missile was indeed a Sarmat. While the type of missile has not been officially confirmed, it's likely the Sarmat, which previously destroyed its test silo at Plesetsk in September 2024. Keep that test silo destruction in mind. We'll be coming back to the Sarmat's history of abject failure soon. In recent days, NOTAMs, notices to airmen, have been issued in anticipation of the test, covering the area between Domborovsky and the Kura test range in Kamchatka, the analyst adds. This tells us that the missile test did take place and that Russia authorized it. Finally, the analyst highlights the main reason why this failed Sarmat test is such bad news for Russia. If this is indeed another Sarmat failure, it will be highly detrimental to the medium-term future of Russian deterrence. The aging R-36M2 missiles, which carry a significant portion of Russia's strategic warheads, are seeing their replacement pushed even further into the future, while their maintenance, previously handled by Ukraine until 2014, remains highly uncertain. That's an interesting statement. It tells us that Putin's push to develop new missiles is happening because of the very campaign of aggression and the later invasion that he launched against the country that was responsible for keeping Russia's older missiles working. Those missiles are now rotting away, presumably because Russia doesn't know how to keep them in good condition, and the Sarmat missiles designed to replace them are blowing up seconds after launch. We say missiles instead of missile for a simple reason. This has happened before, several times. We ask you to remember Marcuse's comments about the Plesetsk test silo destruction. That happened in September 2024, and the reason appears to be the catastrophic failure of a Sarmat missile. Al Jazeera reported on the failure, noting that satellite pictures provided by Maxar Technologies show a massive crater in the ground at a silo site within the Plesetsk cosmodrome. The crater measured around 60 meters or 200 feet across, and it wasn't there in pictures that Maxar Technologies had taken just a few months earlier. The site was believed to be home to Sarmat missiles. Al Jazeera quoted Timothy Wright of the Institute for Strategic Studies, who said, "One possible cause is that the first-stage booster either failed to ignite properly or suffered from a catastrophic mechanical failure, causing the missile to fall back into or land closely adjacent to the silo and explode." In this case, it looks like the Sarmat didn't even make it out of the silo and into the air. At least the 2025 failure saw the missile get a few hundred feet off the ground before it spun out of control and came plummeting right back down. It's here where we start to see the reality of Putin's unstoppable missile. And the reality is that the Sarmat isn't capable of flying, much less traveling the thousands of miles it would need to travel to strike targets in countries like the US. Russia has tried to be as secretive as possible about its Sarmat tests. However, United 24 media notes that what happened in November was either the third or fourth attempt Russia has made at launching the missile. All but one of those launches has failed spectacularly, and the one that didn't was only classed as a partial success. Not that you would know if you listened to Putin. As the New York Times reported in September 2024, Putin has happily claimed that the Sarmat has undergone a successful test. In April 2022, Mr. Putin announced that Russia had successfully test-launched the missile, the Sarmat's only known successful test, the outlet reported. He said at the time that the missile would force all who are trying to threaten our country in the heat of frenzied, aggressive rhetoric to think twice. You may notice a little problem here. The Sarmat's supposed successful test was confirmed by Putin himself. That's not exactly the stamp of credibility that Russia's leader would want it to be. Putin has an agenda, which he outlines in the quote that the New York Times shares, of using the Sarmat to intimidate anybody who opposes Russia. Of course, he would claim that there has been a successful test of Russia's unstoppable missile, despite there being no evidence of that particular test ever occurring. The evidence that we do have is more conclusive. Be it craters in the ground or video of the Sarmat exploding after barely launching, that evidence shows us that there is a massive distance between the on-paper version of the Sarmat that Putin wants the world to fear and the actual version that explodes within seconds after every test launch. The Sarmat isn't unstoppable, it's a non-starter. Let's circle back to something that we mentioned a couple of times, yet have not fully discussed. We told you the footage of the exploding missile shows the Sarmat that failed to launch in November produced a massive cloud of purple smoke. The question has to be asked, why purple? The answer reveals that Russia is struggling to create the kind of ultra-modern missile with which it's trying to threaten the entire world. In its report on the failed launch, Defense Express provided some much-needed details about the purple smoke. The outlet claims that the color is characteristic of missiles that use toxic fuels. In this case, those fuels are nitrogen tetroxide and unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine, which are often referred to as amyl and heptyl. These aren't the kind of fuels that should be used in a missile that's supposed to be as modern as the Sarmat. Russia has been using these toxic fuels since the Soviet era, which tells us that Russia hasn't managed to move forward from its missile design philosophies developed decades ago. We mentioned earlier that Ukraine previously handled the upkeep of the older missiles that the Sarmat is supposed to be replacing. Losing the technical expertise that this maintenance required has hurt Russia badly, and helps explain why it continues to rely on legacy hypergolic propellants for some heavy ICBM roles rather than fully transitioning to newer propellant technologies. Heptyl in particular is the last chemical that Russia wants to have spread into the town near where its latest failed Sarmat missile exploded. The outlet notes that Russia has experienced a similar issue with the failed launch of a Proton missile in Kazakhstan several years ago. That failed launch released heptyl into the environment, which Defense Express says has a strong toxic and mutagenic effect. Chemicals that have this latter effect have the power to permanently alter an organism's DNA, causing genetic mutations, Russia's Proton failure was major enough for Kazakhstan to create a massive cleanup effort for which it billed Russia up to $90 million. Now Russia has just hit itself with a missile that contains the same chemical that forced this cleanup. Putin will have to invest heavily in cleaning up this now contaminated site, in addition to absorbing the loss of another multi-million-dollar missile. That is assuming that Russia even bothers with the cleanup. You may remember we mentioned earlier how regional authorities near the Sarmat test site have already claimed there will be no evacuations. Hopefully, for any Russians living close to where the Sarmat landed, that's a lie told by Russia to convince the world there's nothing to worry about. If it isn't a lie, and the people in the nearby town are going to stay, then toxic fumes and mutagenic chemicals lie in their future. Would Putin sacrifice the health and perhaps even the lives of Russian people to cover up Russia's Sarmat failure? That remains to be seen. But the callousness that Putin has displayed throughout his reign as Russia's president would make such a decision unsurprising. What we know for sure is that another Sarmat has been launched, barely, and it's exploded before Russia could even get a chance to see if the missile can travel a single kilometer, never mind the tens of thousands it's supposed to be capable of traveling. Here's what this may mean for the future of Russia's unstoppable missile. First, a missile that was already a long way behind schedule is now even further away from being actively deployed. As the Jamestown Foundation reports, the Sarmat project has fallen behind schedule almost from the moment that it was announced. The first prototype for the missile was supposed to be finished by June 2015, though that was later delayed to November of the same year. This is a pretty minor delay in the grand scheme of missile design, but it set the stage for a project that has failed to hit any of its marks since. Tests have been postponed constantly because the missile is rarely judged to be ready for them, given that most tests that have been carried out have failed spectacularly, with the only supposed success being claimed by Putin with no evidence. These delays are smart. Militani adds that Russia's strategic missile forces desperately need to certify the Sarmat as being ready to use, especially as the project is now several years behind schedule. So far behind schedule, in fact, that the R-36M they're supposed to be replacing have had to remain deployed even though their already extended service life ended in 2016. There's been a constant unearned enthusiasm over the Sarmat that is exemplified perfectly by Putin himself. On November 12th, just a couple of weeks before the latest failed test of the missile, the Russian Strategic Nuclear Forces website quoted Putin as saying, "This year, we will put the Sarmat heavy intercontinental ballistic missile system through combat trials, and next year deploy it on combat duty." Presumably that comment was made in 2024, as the outlet claims that it means that Putin believed that the first Sarmat would be deployed in 2025. Even in 2024, that claim seemed ridiculous, as the outlet itself claimed it would be rather unusual for the Sarmat to be deployed with no further flight tests, especially as the best it's achieved up to this point is a supposed partially successful launch. There are also no signs that the Plesetsk silo that was supposed to be home to Russia's Sarmats is being restored, making 2025 an ambitious target in 2024. It's an impossible one now. There's only 1 month left in the year, and the latest test has ended in a catastrophic failure. All that Russia has on its hands is an unstoppable missile that can't even fly, and this latest test has done little more than cast doubts over how worrying Russia's Sarmat project really is to the Western world. Both the Arms Control Association, or ACA, and the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, made this point back in 2024, when a Sarmat detonation destroyed the Plesetsk silo. The ACA highlighted that Russia was claiming that the Sarmat had been deployed for combat duty in 2023, which is a seemingly ludicrous statement, and that Putin himself has stated that only administrative and bureaucratic procedures needed to be completed before the missile could move into mass production. Bear in mind that this was after only one partially successful test and several failures, with the November incident adding to the latter. The Sarmat wasn't on combat duty in 2023. And if it was, there is no way that Russia can trust that missile to do what it's supposed to do, now that it has an ever-growing catalogue of failed launches on its hands. Conducting a real Sarmat launch now means that Russia would more likely than not end up striking itself with a useless missile that carries multiple nuclear warheads. Mutually assured destruction would become self-destruction if Russia were to use the Sarmat in its current state. Still, Russia persists with the Sarmat program. According to Nikolai Sokov, who is a Russian nuclear policy expert, the program may only still be active because Russia wants to preserve competition between its intercontinental ballistic missile developers. Is that what the Sarmat has been reduced to? Motivation for another design team? So much for an unstoppable missile, and RUSI is no less damning in its assessment of the failure of the Russian Sarmat program. In a detailed examination of what has caused previous Sarmat issues, RUSI reveals that the missile may have never reached its intended final form because there are issues with Russia's entire missile design setup. Structural fragilities within the Russian missile design and manufacturing ecosystem have also been cited as possible causes, something exemplified by personnel shortages at Proton PM, which manufactures the Sarmat's propulsion system, the think tank says. It adds that the Sarmat is among the most complex missiles that Russia has ever developed, especially when it comes to the missile's propulsion system. RUSI also says that Russia may well have accepted the Sarmat into service despite it being such a massive failure every time it's tested, because it needs to present some sort of threat now that the R-36 missiles it had before are well beyond their expiration dates. Putin is getting desperate. And to highlight that fact, RUSI compares the R-36 to the Sarmat. The former underwent 20 successful test flights because it became Russia's intercontinental ballistic missile of choice. The best that Sarmat has managed is one partially successful test and several failures. Whatever threat the missile is supposed to pose is outweighed massively by the sheer risk that Russia faces if it tries to use the Sarmat. We said it before, Russia currently has a greater chance of hitting itself with the Sarmat than it does another country. Strategically, having a nuclear missile that it can't trust is a nightmare for Russia. Other nuclear-capable nations that have properly tested missiles will feel far more confident knowing that Russia is throwing all of its eggs into the broken Sarmat basket. As for Putin, he and his Kremlin cronies will try to pretend that the failed Sarmat launch never happened. The footage will be ignored, the nuclear threats and the braying about Russia's unstoppable missile will continue, but Putin will know that other nuclear-capable nations, including the likes of China, which is supposed to be an ally of Russia, won't fear the Sarmat. November showed us what the Satan II is really all about. A true fallen angel, though one that is more dangerous to its own makers than it is to anybody else. And as Putin tries to pick up the pieces from yet another failed Sarmat test, he's having to deal with potential enemies working on getting their hands on long-range missiles of their own. Sweden is the latest, as it's gearing up to find a Kremlin killer missile that terrifies Putin more than NATO itself. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of Russia's latest and most disastrous military blunders. And thank you as always for watching.